everybody. Happy Wednesday and welcome to June 16th. I can hardly believe we're here already. And I'm here with Kenneth Edmonds. He's actually going to be doing most of the talking today. And Ken, I am so excited, not just because of flat rate today, but as you know, I'm a fisherman. I live on the shores of Lake Erie and spend a lot of my spare time fishing. And I'm getting ever closer to that fourth Saturday in June when I'm allowed to go bass fishing. So for anyone else in Canada, Lake Ontario or Lake Erie, bass fishing starts very soon. And what have you been up to, Ken?
Oh, same as usual, working in the garden. I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but I'm harvesting tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, yellow squash. I'll pick green beans today. I've been working on, we've had finally dried out a little bit. Last week we had like 3.5 inches of rain in one storm. So
Wow.
it was a swamp now. And I finished getting the fence up so the deer are out because the deer thought I was the local golden corral.
Yeah, I saw a deer this morning on my way to work. Actually, we have them out where I live as well. And where there's one, there's usually more to follow. But this morning, nope, just one. And hey, everybody, just to let you know that this is a live stream. So if you have any comments or questions, we certainly encourage you to post them as you have that thought enter your head. And you may have some today as Ken is talking on the service side. So please feel free, whether you're watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you'll have the ability to comment in any one of those platforms. I think the only place where we can't see who it is commenting is in the Facebook group. It's a privacy setting they have. You can change that. But otherwise, who knows? Maybe your comments aren't going to be nice ones and you can leave those anonymously. So whatever floats your boat. And Ken, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the news. We talked a little bit last week about Konnech Minolta, and you had some further insights from speaking with some dealers about how that's actually having an impact.
Well, it was interesting because last week we talked about them, acquiring a bunch of dealers in my area, in this area, let's say in the Carolinas in general. I had people that I used to support that were Konnech Minolta service managers that now work for Dex, which is going to be a change internally for them. I have dealers that while they had to compete with the Konnech branch, it was a different level of competition than they will probably see once Dex absorbs that. And so, it just, all of these things are changing, making the market more uncertain. And I had an interesting conundrum. In fact, I reached out to Patricia Ames, see if I could get them to do an analysis because it's beyond my scope. But one of the things that we've seen, and I'm starting to do some to help dealers build out like 5-year plans. And so you can start looking 5 years out and start thinking about it. The trend in our industry has been both declining volume and declining revenue per click. So it's like a double whammy on service. And if that trend continues,
Which
it
raises
real questions.
Yeah.
The future. And so I kind of asked her to reach out and do some thinking about that, because at some point we're going to get to either 0 nothing or 0 clicks. The other side of it is that in the financial model that is referred to as the global model, the Hayes and Hansen model, whatever label you want to put on it, but it's taught by the BTA and Pro Finance, is that service operates at 52% profit. And 52% of nothing, when you have no revenue, is not very healthy. The other piece of it is that what happens is that the sales department in that model operates at about a negative 6% loss. Okay, so you think about what's going to happen is what dealers, to try to maintain top line revenue, they're going to have to try to grow sales, which means that they're going to lose more money. And as the service profitability goes down, it just becomes a really vicious chain of events. And so, like I said, the question where I'm trying to find some answers is to think about, okay, what is the new model going to look like? Because it's starting to look like the old model is going to be broken here in the near future.
Well, that's why we're here. I mean,
it is.
The writing has been on the wall, but it certainly is interesting seeing how these impacts just continue, to roil in our space, right? So, Yeah, so thanks for sharing that. And certainly the other part that I'd add to that is, as those dealerships start to do things on their own, um, that probably will, like you said, the competition will be different. It'll probably be a lot more localized and a lot heavier, right? And certainly having some kind of differentiator, if it's flat rate or managed network services or some other kind of converged offering, to your point, I think the time to build that 5-year plan is now, right? And it's curious that you're doing that. I know you're speaking to it at the BTA coming up at the Fall Colors event as well, right? And
Right.
we've been speaking about it at the Managed Print Services Association as well. That we've kind of hit this point now where maybe 20 or 25 years ago, a lot of the people that we deal with actually did build business plans for their managed print practices or other things going forward. But that probably hasn't been done in a very long time, right? And there is no time like the present with all of this market uncertainty to start looking at what that 5-year plan is to see what we want to be when we grow up, right? So, certainly want to make sure we get there.
I think it's critical. It interests me, and that's why I'm speak to it for the BTA. I'm actually working with a dealer starting next week. We're going to spend about 12 weeks building out a comprehensive 5-year plan, because people, and this kind of touches on our conversation today, is nobody thinks about the fact that it takes about 3 years to grow a service technician up to somebody that's really good. And if you don't know where you're going to be 3 years from now, how can you hire somebody today?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, how long it takes to actually get a good, skilled person like that up to speed. And that the statistics are that anytime you lose somebody like that, like a really high skilled player in the organization, that it costs you roughly 2.5 times of what their annual salary is. So, and that kind of lays into what you're saying, is that a lot of that time is going to be actual training, right? Sorry about my phone, people. It's I love live streaming. And certainly with this model, as we go forward, we talk about the purple cow, so the business planning, yes, to insert that purple cow. And I'm looking forward to hearing you talk today about how you create that purple cow, even on the service side, right? That things are different. And Ken, the customers that we've dealt with so far, one of the things that that really comes up is how they approach equipment sales, right? And in the traditional model, how when we talk about equipment, it's really left up to the sales reps to determine what goes in there. And I'm not saying that's always a bad thing, but certainly sometimes that does mean, kind of oversized pieces going into places where maybe they're being underutilized or aren't being placed for necessarily all of, the power that they can actually deliver, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the screen. I'm actually going to hand it over to you for a few minutes. And we'll talk a little bit. The first thing I think we can talk about is right sizing equipment. And this is one area that I really enjoy hearing you speak to. So maybe you can move into that now, and I'll put up the screen for you.
Okay. I got to change what I'm looking at here real quickly. Sorry about that. But this is a good example. This is data from BEI services. And from those of you that are not using this function in BEI services, you really need to be looking at this, because at the bottom of this screen, and I'll move it where you can see it a little bit, it highlights the relationship between volume and cost. And what we see is that in low volumes for a device, its costs are really high. And as it moves out in volume and increases, what happens is the costs start to significantly decrease. So in this case, we're going to look at this particular device is 74 pages a minute, and 8,000 pages a minute and below. The cost on it is 9 mils, almost a penny, 9.99. Even if we get it into the next volume band up, the cost per page on it is at 4.7, a significant decrease, but still very expensive. As we get more and more copies on it, the price starts to drop off considerably. So here's the interesting thing: as you look at this dealer, what's their population look like? Well, about 3/4, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of their equipment is in the volume band where it's very expensive. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at another piece of equipment in that same volume band. And this is a little slower piece of equipment, but again, when we think about it at 70 pages a minute, if we're only making 3,000 pages a month, it doesn't matter much. And we're going to get out of this first band just because that's probably some setups, and on low volume machines, they really skew the number. So this dealer's got a lot of them down there. Page cost is at $0.01. But as soon as we go over 1,200 pages a minute, we're now at 369. And we look at that at 5,000, we're at 129. So at 5,000 pages, between 3,000 and 5,000 pages a month, this machine is 9 times as cheap to operate as was the higher speed machine. And
sorry,
so,
what did you say? How much?
9 times cheaper. And, in
so not 10%, not 20%.
Yeah. Well, and here's the interesting thing is that when we look at the combined total, you can build a combined deal in the flat rate market, taking advantage of this device and its lower initial cost, save the dealer a ton of money and probably get close to doubling your profit margin in the whole deal because you're selling them the right size piece of equipment. And it doesn't matter what manufacturer you look at, what volume band. This is very typical. I got started at this when I was working at Sharp. And I was looking at data. A dealer had asked me a question, and this was years back, but they had a 50-page a minute machine, and it had been in the field for a long time, so it was out of that range of setups. And 70% of the machines were operating in a volume band that the cost per page, and this is parts and labor, and with no markup and no toner included, was at $0.01 on a 50-page a minute black and white device. And that was cost. And you start to think to yourself, if I had those machines in the field, unless I'm getting a nickel a page, I have to go out and cut the cords.
Yeah.
And so to make everything better in your department, and I don't care if we're talking about flat rate today, but it doesn't matter whether we're dealing in flat rate. If it matters when you're selling service that you want to pick the devices that are going to be most cost effective for your organization. That is so important.
Yeah, and what's hard though under a model that isn't flat rate is that oftentimes as we've talked about, the device placement is oftentimes dictated by sales, right? They kind of work that game. So there's this tug of war back and forth, between the sales and the service department on what the right thing to do is, right? Yeah, I love this tool being able to showcase kind of what the differences are, the comparisons between those devices. Looks like I'm glitching out. Hope everyone's enjoying the 1980s rock video kind of view of my face here. Not sure what's going on, but
I don't know what you ate for breakfast this morning, but that is obviously affecting your computer.
I'm not going full screen view today on myself. Where I was going to, kind of finish with that is oftentimes when I was, doing assessments, even the traditional cost per page world, is that I would get the customer to consider the total cost per page, right? So oftentimes when we talk cost per page, we talk about just the service component. We don't really, consider that hardware piece in there either, right? Because at the end of the day, that page cost, you have to have that hardware piece in there as a consideration of that, right?
Oh, exactly. And that's where the dealers give up the profit, because they don't look at if we package this in most cases, we're selling on a cost per page or a monthly bill. Okay. They don't care what the piece of equipment is. They care that it meets their needs. So if we pick the smallest possible piece of equipment, we can get in there at it and undercut the competition probably on the total monthly bill, because we have much less equipment costs invested, and we're going to be more profitable because the equipment is going to perform better. And so well, the students in my training class hear me rail about that on a consistent basis, about the need to sell the right thing. And this is where service should drive what models we sell. And I know a lot of people think, well, that doesn't take in consideration what the manufacturer wants. And I'll make this statement is that the manufacturer is not your friend. No.
Hey, what you were talking about there with, that it actually performs better, that's so important in a flat rate program. And I know, for example, that, cars have this problem, right? If they're not used at all, if they're not used enough, they can often suffer service issues that they wouldn't for a car that's actually being used, the way that it should be, right? Is that the same with equipment? Does it have to have a certain, amount of runtime to be able to work effectively?
Oh yeah, and idling is wears out equipment, costs you a lot of money, and I tell the service managers to think about it from the perspective what you're doing is selling your customer a Porsche to drive it on a go-kart track, and
Yeah,
it's never going to work well.
I gotta.
I'll have to share a great example of that. I'll tell one quick story.
Sure.
Well, my
And then
story.
we'll come to Ken's comment. Yeah, go ahead. Share your story first.
Okay.
We see you, Ken. We got you.
One of my dealers when I worked at Sharp thought it was a good idea to sell a 125 page a minute, fully loaded production print device into the records department of a county courthouse, and it was used as a walk-up copier, and they were having nothing but problems with it. And I went in and I looked at it, and I looked at the volume, and I looked at what they'd done. And when I left, I wrote back to the service manager in my report that they would never, ever be able to make any money on that machine. And that was, in fact, the worst possible placement for that device. Because we're talking about a fully loaded machine, all the accessories. Now, the sales guy got rich probably on the deal, or maybe not rich, but the sales guy did really good. But in every other way possible, that company lost money for 5 years. They bled out the nose because of what this decision that was made by the sales rep. And, a sales rep, unless you change his compensation plan, is always going to act in his own best interests. We all do. And to Ken's comment, he said small means expensive. That is not necessarily correct. It depends. Some small devices are hugely expensive. So what you have to look at is your portfolio of equipment. In fact, actually, we can bring up my next bullet point here in a minute because we'll talk about that. Is that when you're looking at doing a flat rate for a customer and covering all of their devices, what you want to do is go in and make sure that the fleet is the best fleet for what that customer needs, and that you choose in each volume band the most cost-effective device. And you get rid of the orphans and the widows. What you want is devices that are standard as much as possible across your fleet, because then you start to reduce your training costs. You reduce the amount of car stock that you have to carry. In general, you make everything easier, and your techs get so much more proficient. If they work on a device once a month, they'll never be good at it. If they work on them 3 times a day, they'll know them like the back of their hand, and they start to become super efficient. And so those two things kind of go hand in hand. We right size it, and then we, let's say, cherry pick the devices we want to support. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one manufacturer. It may be that you'll pick a couple of manufacturers. But in any given volume band, you should have your preferred device that meets what the customer needs. And I'll let you talk a minute. I know you want to speak it, Ken. So.
No, that's okay. No, I agree that there are situations, right? And devices certainly are situational. And I would agree that oftentimes small devices are, very expensive if the device is being overutilized and that cost per page is extraneous, right? And that's what I really love about this tool that you're showing, is that it will make it evidently clear when that small device is, too expensive for what you're asking it to do, right? And similarly with your story on some of the larger devices, I have seen that where, a device that is supposed to do, let's say 20,000 pages a month, if it's only doing 3,000 pages a month, I can guarantee you that the total cost per page on that one is far too high for, what it's been designed to do, right? So yeah, really good point, Ken. I would agree. Most of the time, small does mean expensive, but oftentimes underutilization, means really expensive too, depending on the piece of gear that's there, right?
That is entirely correct. And just one other quick illustration of it. I had a dealer that had some equipment they bought and, got a good deal on the equipment. And they sold 60 page a minute light production color copiers to mom and pop print shops.
Yep.
And they came to me wanting me to help them make money on it. I looked at the data. I looked at the global data from BEI. Said, sorry, you'll never make a dime on this equipment. It shouldn't be there. You're going to lose money for the next 5 years.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to have the service department involved with, the profitability checking. And that's one thing I know that we'll probably, jump to in a second. And maybe we'll, before we talk about that, move into your next point, which was about fleet standardization. So the right sizing of equipment is one thing that really affects, kind of service pricing when we're doing a flat rate or a cost per page. Maybe talk about fleet standardization and how that has an impact as well.
Well, and what you see, especially if you're picking up a customer's existing fleet, and I'm a fan of that. And we've talked before, I'm a fan of you go in and you buy out the customer's existing fleet, and then you get rid of the stuff you don't want to service. You build the cost of the buyout back into the lease, so you're not out anything out of pocket. It kind of makes the IT guys happy because they'll be the guys that get the check because that was network equipment, so they have a little capital to work with. But then you start to put in the devices, and the nice thing about in the flat rate environment is you don't have to put in new equipment, so you have a lot of options with this. But again, you want to make the model and manufacturer range that you support as tight as possible. Again, a tech that works on one machine once a month or once every 2 or 3 months, he'll never get good at it. And you're carrying a lot of parts, or you're having to let the situation go where you have to overnight parts in because you don't carry the part for it, because the cost of, the worst case scenario is you have one device. If you car stock for it, you've got a lot of capital tied up to do that. You got money tied up in supplies that you don't need to have tied up. You just have all of these costs associated with it. And to really become super successful at this, we want to do everything we can to find ways to drive our costs down. Now, that's our mindset in service in general. But the benefit of it is in the flat rate environment is, as once that flat rate is issued, if we find additional ways to save money, guess where that money goes? It goes to the profitability for us. And it starts to compensate from the challenge we have with declining revenue and declining print volume. Because if the print volume continues to decline, that just improves our profitability. And so we get this fleet built out and it's standard, and our guys are good on it. Our car stock is dialed in. All of the things that we need it to be, we have spare refurbished devices that fit, pretty much. I would encourage you to have across the board. So if you got something that goes significantly south in the field, you just swap it out and bring that unit back in, rebuild it, and it goes in. Because again, the equipment is yours. You own it. You control it. So you can do what you want with it. You have good trade-in equipment that comes in on a non-flat rate deal. It then becomes a replacement for a high-cost device in the field. You have a device that, because of age and wear and tear, is starting to cost you money. That device comes out, and a piece of used equipment that matches the functionality goes in to replace it. And the more standardized your fleet is, the easier all of this gets.
Yeah. I love, using the Southwest example, how they standardized on their planes, because that's both for technicians, also for the pilots, and for, the flight crew, right? And, you got to think that standardization in a flat rate helps as well, because for the people selling that equipment, it gets easier as well, right? That they have, fewer complexities to deal with, that they've really got a good understanding of what they are selling, right?
Oh yeah, it simplifies everything in the process. You know, and the other piece associated with it is it simplifies your supply chain management at your customer's office. If you have 20 of the same printer, maybe you stock 2 extra. If you have 20 different printers, you're going to have 20 different extra cartridges out there so that nobody's out. And again, that ties up capital. And all of this is about trying to minimize your capital investment in supporting your equipment, minimize your expense, and become as efficient as possible. For the customer, it's easy because they don't have to worry about it. If all their printers use one cartridge, they just grab a spare cartridge and put it in, and they're good. And you trigger the machine triggered an order, so you've got one on the way. It'll be here tomorrow. And all of this now is just so simple and easy. One print driver, which means that no matter what device they print to in the building, you've got a single driver if possible.
Yeah, or a few anyway, right? And
yeah, at least just a couple, not 14 or 15 devices and different capabilities. And
well, that was always a big ask when I was doing assessments. IT was begging and pleading with us to be able to manage their drivers for them, right? Because there were just so many of them, and there was never really a good answer to that. So it's like, I know that things have gotten better over time, but the other thing with that, Ken, that you mentioned by being able to swap out the devices, because you do have this kind of standardized fleet, is when it ties to the customer experience for downtime, right? Like, it's so much faster to fix a customer.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, go ahead. I'll let you finish that thought.
Let me just speak to that. One of the things I did is back when I was in the cartridge remanufacturing business, and that's where I started in this industry, is I had a contract with a hospital where I provided 24/7 service. And one of the things I did to make that easy is I had a hot swap spare in the hospital, so that if a critical department went down, because I was the one usually that got the phone call, I would go in, wheel the spare in, change the IP address, wheel the one that needed work out, and I'll deal with this tomorrow, and go back home and get back in bed. And it just makes those kinds of things so easy. I have dealers that I supported when I was working for Konica and Sharp, that where they had high-end clients or high device count clients, they would typically build into the deal a hot swap spare, so that instead of being down, all they had to do was bring another device over. And hospitals are ideal for that. You just wheel another device up over to the elevator, take it to wherever you need it, plug it in, IP it, and now they're back up to doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Hey, the other thing I love talking to you about is when we're consulting is improving service performance, right? So I think everything that you've spoken to already has contributed to that, but maybe we'll, speak specifically to that, how you could actually, kind of use the flat rate program to help improve service performance.
Well, and we've talked to a couple of things, because we simplify the fleet, that automatically improves service performance. But there are some other things that we want to do. Is we want to look at what do our technicians need to get better than they are. In so many areas right now, what we find is that the manufacturers don't teach troubleshooting. The previous sources of trained troubleshooters, which was typically the military, that skill set is diminished dramatically. You get lots of part swappers, and I'm sure most of the dealers listening and people that are in the industry know what I'm talking about. That's how they fix things. They swap parts till they hit it. That's the most costly, ineffective way there is to be able to service equipment. Swapping parts costs you a ton, causes a lot of customer frustration. Then you need to look at and think about, okay, now how do I structure my service team? Because, for example, you may, depending on the geographic concentration of devices, you may be stuck where you have to have a geographic area. But if you have high density populations, then maybe you start to have a printer tech and an MFP tech. Maybe that's the way you split it up. Maybe you have a team that does, if you have 2 brands. One of the dealers I supported in the past, they had a Konica team and a Ricoh team. But what you start to do then is you start to reduce your training costs, because you're only training people on part of what's in the fleet. The other thing that you do is you start to simplify car stock, because they only carry parts for what they work on, not for the entire gamut. So one of the things, and when we work with dealers, these are things that we'll look at is, okay, where do we have ways that we can become more efficient? Because again, everything we do to improve efficiency and to reduce cost, it just goes to the bottom line. And so we'll look at equipment performance, we'll look at technician performance, we look at the scope of the territory that a dealer supports, to try to find the optimum solutions for it. For those that aren't on BEI and have the capability, we typically have some tools from BEI that we will recommend you use. A good one is their quote tool, because we're talking again at selecting the right device.
Yeah.
BEI has a great quote tool for doing that. But it's all about trying to develop an organization. And what I encourage dealers to do, and in fact, when I help dealers with business planning, I suggest that they start with a blank sheet of paper and figure out what a perfect situation for your dealership would be. What are the things that you want to accomplish? And then you start to make sure that you build everything out that moves you in that direction. And even if you're just picking up flat rate as a part of your model, you think about, where do I want my dealership to be in 5 years? And how do I start moving everything in that direction? You can't wait till 5 years from now gets here. Ask the typewriter dealers that didn't pay attention to things like Wang and HP and the PC.
Yeah. You said a really good thing there too, that I think people should really be conscious about, because everything, we've talked about this 100 times, that everything under a flat rate program becomes a cost, even if it used to be a revenue item, right? And that car stock, right, the stuff that you have waiting and sitting in stock, either to supply or fix a device, that the less of that you have, the more cost effective that becomes, right? Because fewer opportunities for mistakes about bringing the wrong thing or not having the right thing in the van as you're going to a customer site, et cetera, right? I thought that was pretty cool, kind of about the standardization as well.
Yeah, and all of these things link together. That's and it's one of those things that, as I worked for the manufacturer, and I've supported some, the biggest dealers in the United States were dealers that I supported at times. And you look at how they do things, you start to look at trying to build improvements and enhancements. I'll give you a good example. You go back to standardization, what happens is, then when we have some machines that maybe we don't want to put them back out in the field, but now we can take them apart and make spare parts. And so we can start to build a reclaim process for things that are high dollar, low consumption, and are not wear items. Some things, they just wear out and you would not reclaim them. But circuit boards and cables and harnesses and so many things that are very expensive, if you have just a few models, it becomes very easy to build a inventory source of reclaimed parts that now become a further way to drive cost reduction into your service team. And and then the last piece of it, and we don't have a bullet point, but it ties directly to service performance, is the way we pay technicians. And this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, because most dealers pay technicians to do things that they don't want to do. It's like and the same applies in sales. They pay the salespeople to do things that are bad for the dealership. They pay technicians to do things that are bad for the dealership. And that just floors me, that they structure their compensation in a way that does it. I was talking to not a service manager, but a dealer principal one time, and I mentioned putting a bonus in for a technician. He says, "Why would I bonus my technicians? I pay them by the hour." Well, I was quick enough to put a throttle on my tongue, but my first thought was, "Yep, and you're going to get 8 hours a day out of them." But that's not what you want. what you want to do, and we talk a lot of, and this is true throughout all the things we do in flat rate, is we want to get our compensation plan aligned with the behavior we want. So what we want our technicians to do is we want them to go out and do a really good job of fixing equipment the first time. And it's really interesting because I can give you two examples of dealers that changed their model to focus on that. One of those dealers doubled the number of clicks his technicians were able to support. So he avoided having to hire 10 technicians. And it was by focusing on doing things right and then paying the technicians. And they paid big bonuses for the technician success. But when you think about the cost of hiring 10 technicians, you can afford a tremendous amount of bonus money. In the other situation, I had a dealer, and this goes to the thought process, and you just don't even want to get me started on calls per day. But I had a dealer, and this gentleman now is a very successful executive in the company he works for. But he was a field service supervisor, and we were talking about how busy his techs were. And he says, yeah, my guys are doing 10 calls a day. And I said, you got to slow them down. He says, I can't slow them down. We have too many calls. And they changed their comp focus to pay technicians for fixing it right the first time. And within a year, he was telling me, he says, Ken, I don't know what to do with my technicians. I can't find anywhere to keep them out of the office.
Yeah, get more customers. And it's so important, right? I actually built a calculator for Tiger Paw based, it's for tech utilization, and wrote a guide on it too, right? Because it's such an important piece of, profitability, right? And I love the work that you do on that. Hey, we're running out of time. So I'm going to move on to basically how, folks can get more out of this, right? And the 10-day challenge, for those that are watching that haven't seen the 10-day challenge, I highly encourage you to get in touch with us about that. And Ken, as you know, the MPSA is one of our partners in this. And, if you're an MPSA member, you can get the 10-day challenge for free. So that's like $239 we charge for it. And to give you an idea how good that is for you as a dealer, I mean, MPSA membership is only $200 a year. So right out of the gate, you're $39 a head. And on top of that, dealers get 6 months for free right now to get started with the MPSA, right? It's not about making money for that organization. It's about making sure that we work together to better the industry, and flat rate is certainly becoming a strong part of that, right? So reach out to me, reach out to Ken. We'll get you in touch, or anyone else that that is part of the MPSA, and we'll make sure you get that for free. The other part is get certified. And we're going to talk about this every episode, not for long, but just to let people know that you do not necessarily have to get trained by us to get certified for flat rate. So if you've got a flat rate program of your own already and you want to get certified, we can help you to do that. So we have a testing paradigm, which we can take you through to make sure that you have the basic tenets that we believe are important for flat rate. If you have them, you'll get the flat rate certified badge, which you can use in your marketing materials and with your customers. And Ken, you did a nice job building an actual site for customers, which you're kind of showing right now, which is for end user lead generation, right? So they can go there. And as you can see right here, it says ask for flat rate certified. And so get in touch with us, figure out how you can do that. And of course, Ken and I are busy as anything right now, actually working with dealers, taking them through mentorship programs and training them on how to do flat rate certified. We cover everything that we talk about in this program. So Jesus, if you want to have us take you through it, we're starting to get busy. I think, Ken, when we looked at the number of dealers that we're willing to commit to, I think we've only got room for one more right now, because we're actually doing an accelerated version of the program for one of our dealer partners right now, right?
Yes, and as you said, we're starting to stay very busy. And the one thing I'll comment about this website is as we start to get more and more dealers flat rate certified, we're going to start spreading this word more and more. We have some plans to try to get this on national media, a lot of different ways that we're going to try to help the end users understand the value of finding a flat rate certified dealer. So hopefully you'll be one of the leaders in your marketplace. We talked last week about the Oklahoma land rush, and they called the people that did that Sooners, because the sooner you got there, the more land you could get. And I
Yeah,
would encourage you to be Sooners in the virtual world here.
absolutely. And hey, the last thing I'll leave all of our friends with today is what we're going to be talking about next week. So episode 7, and this is a fun one, selling flat rate for more. We've kind of gotten ourselves into this mentality in the cost per page world that it's all about cost savings, right? And Ken, you probably hear this as much as I do, but the first words out of people's mouths when they're selling the benefits of managed print is, we'll save you a bunch of money. And oftentimes that's not really what the customer is looking for in the first place. And flat rate is a great opportunity for you not to sell your services for less, but to sell them for more. And I'm really excited to talk about that next week. And hey, everyone, I apologize for not having any video up here today. As you saw earlier, it was glitching, and now suddenly it's not working at all. But and Ken, you got something to share?
Well, I did, because I've got I could only hold stuff in so long. Because you saw the icon for the purple cow. And right now, if you're in a normal cost per copy environment, your customer is always wanting you to be the cheapest. But when you are the only person selling a purple cow, you are automatically the cheapest, no matter what your price is.
Yeah. And for those that are flat rate certified first, guess what? You are the only purple cow in town. So, hey, Ken, as always, I really enjoyed this one today because it's such an area of expertise for you. And I'm sure everyone learned, a ton. And encourage everyone, just remember, we do these every Wednesday at what time, Ken?
We do them at 11 o'clock.
Every Wednesday. So start getting used to the cadence. We love having you here. And you can also view the recordings on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So, Ken, until next week, just wishing everyone a great week. Happy selling.
Okay. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you on next Wednesday.
Cheers, y'all.